in Native tradition, in many Native cultures, the color red symbolizes life itself. So it symbolizes the lifeblood going through our body. It symbolizes the connection between this world and the next. And in many cultural traditions, there's the belief that, that spirits, and when you move into the next world, your spirit, as it leaves your body and arrives, has a bright red light. And so you're shining red, and you can be seen. So it's a color where you're spiritually acknowledged. And it's a color that's sort of like a magnet or lighthouse lights. I'm here, and I'm good. So just wanted to give you all that little bit of information in terms of why red. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ismana and Rachel. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, our lovely poet from Lake County has arrived. Yeah, right. We're going to get her mic'd up for filming.
Of course I wore a turtleneck.
All right.
Hello. I made it.
Yay. Okay. We're so glad you made it, and so happy to have you here. Thank you so much, Georgina. So I would like to introduce you to Georgina Marie Guardado, who is the Poet Laureate of Lake County, California, and drove here today. It's a long drive. She is a Poets Laureate Fellow with the Academy of American Poets. Georgina is of Mojave and Mexican-American descent. Her work has appeared in The Bloom, Poets.org, Gulf Coast Journal, and Two Hawks Quarterly, just to name a few. She is a first-year graduate student and a scholar of the Kwame Dawes Map Makers and Master of Fine Arts Merit Endowments at Pacific University. Thank you so much for coming all the way to Pacific Grove to speak to us.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. A little bit louder? Okay. Thank you so much for having me tonight, and I apologize for my lateness. It usually would take like 4.5 hours to get here, but it took over 6 hours today. There's so much traffic, some accidents, so just glad I'm here. I've been thinking about this event for months, and I have some goodies to talk to you about. So I'm so sorry I missed Linda's beautiful presentation as well, but I wanted to go from that into a Langston Hughes poem before I go into Walt Whitman. And you might know that Langston Hughes has some conversation with Walt Whitman through his poetry. So I found this poem called Dust Bowl, and I thought it was so beautiful I wanted to share it tonight. Dust Bowl by Langston Hughes. The land wants me to come back, to a handful of dust in autumn, to a raindrop, in the palm of my hand in spring. The land wants me to come back, to a broken song in October, to a snowbird on the wing. The land wants me to come back. Langston Hughes is known for his brevity, and he succeeds very well. So I wanted to give a little talk to start, and then I'll read some of my own work that's kind of a call and response to Walt Whitman. When I was first invited to be part of this event, I was told I would represent the American Indian voice, and I have an interesting relationship with my Native American heritage for many reasons. And some of the work tonight is supposed to kind of sing a song for myself about my citizenship, about my heritage, about democracy, and how poets can speak to our freedom of speech. Kathleen was also considering, as she said in one of her emails, Whitman's vision of our democracy. via his poetry and how it's changed over time. So I was thinking about that when I was putting together some of the poems that I would read tonight. And my relationship with Walt Whitman is kind of shaky as well. So the reason being, I'm sure some people know that his work, or him as a person, has been somewhat controversial over the years in knowing his views of people of color, Native Americans, Hispanics. And yet his work is so profound and prevalent in our literary community. So I wanted to start with a little bit of my observation of Walt Whitman's work. I am an MFA student. I'm studying for my master's degree in poetry. Poetry has been my passion for many years. And Walt Whitman is actually a poet I've intentionally avoided for many years. Not because his work is not good at all. I think the last thing I wanted to do was study more poetry by voices that don't necessarily represent me. So I avoided him for many years until grad school. I was kind of forced to witness his work, and I started with Leaves of Grass. It turns out I liked it, by the way. So Walt Whitman is considered one of our most important and influential poets of the modernist era. He championed free verse poetry, which, if you're not familiar with, it's basically a freer version of poetry with no line breaks, but no form, rhyme, meter, things like that. His work also was considered transcendent in his time with how it challenged narratives, such as themes of poetry. Instead of focusing on social and political context necessarily, he focused on nature, individualism, sexuality even. And his collection, Leaves of Grass, exemplifies this and continues to be a rendered collection of poetry today. In the opening poem, Song of Myself, Whitman celebrates and honors his own body and praises nature. I celebrate myself, begins the poem, and he ruminates on observance of nature. Observing a spear of summer grass, he writes, the sniff of green leaves and dry leaves, mossy scabs of the worm fence and heaped stones, and elder and mullein and pokeweed. The poem proceeds with Whitman meditating on life and meaning, and he poses questions throughout the poem. What do you think has become of the young and old men? And more curiously, a boy asking, what is the grass? In which Whitman considers if it is the handkerchief of the Lord. Or, I guess the grass is itself a child, the produced babe of vegetation. In section 15 of Leaves of Grass, he repeats where, as he expounds on the acts of nature in terms of his own existence. One of my favorite lines from Leaves of Grass, where the quail is whistling betwixt the woods and the wheat lot, and where the she-whale swims in her calves and never forsakes them. Though Whitman is revered for his innovative and unique contributions to the history of literature, a common perception of Whitman, especially in the current day, is that he held racist beliefs towards Black and Native Americans. He uses anaphora throughout some of his poetry as a form of repetition. In the poem Voices, the repetition of voices, he attempts to be representative of diverse voices in his work. He says, in I Sing the Body Electric, another well-known celebrated poem, he expresses that the body is not only in his face, but in the limbs and joints, the carriage of the neck, or the flex of his waist and knees. Perhaps more defining of this particular poem I found when I read it is his expression that the body is sacred no matter who it belongs to. Is it a slave? Is it one of the dull-faced immigrants who just landed on the wharf? Each belongs here anywhere, just as well as the well-off, just as much as you. Lastly, in the poem Faces, Whitman writes of the many different faces seen while sauntering the pavement or riding the country bedroads. He describes faces of friendship, those of hunters and fishers, even a dog's. This face is a dog's snout sniffing for garbage, he writes. This poem, again containing anaphora and written in free verse, though it moves into more metaphoric imagery, for example, with this face is a haze, more hills than the Arctic Sea. He describes someone who has veins protruding from their neck, gripping their teeth together. The poem speaks to the acceptance of diversity. He writes, "Off the word I have spoken, I accept not one, red, white, or black. All are deific, meaning godlike, and suggesting non-white faces were just as deserving of existence of their counterparts. And yet, we have so much history that might speak to the other." So that's kind of why I have a shaky relationship with Walt Whitman in terms of his history as a person and his work. And we'll never quite know, of course, how he felt, but he did leave behind a legacy of work and a reason for us to kind of converse and sing back and forth with his work. So that's just kind of an introduction. Oh, sure. Sorry. Okay, can you still hear me? Okay. So I wanted to start with that, just kind of a little bit of a background between my relationship with Walt Whitman. And all of those things kind of had me thinking about my own work and how it can speak to the work of Walt Whitman and still maintain my own voice in it. So I'm going to read a few of my own poems that I felt directly spoke back to the work that I read in Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, including some of the more race-related opinions that some people have of who Walt Whitman was, and how those experiences we're still dealing with today. So for an example, I am a poet laureate of Lake County, California. I was appointed almost 4 years ago. And surprisingly, as much as it's been a true honor, I get to visit places like this. It's been really hard being a woman of color in a small rural area in a place of leadership. And so I find myself often at tables that I never have been invited to before. And not everyone likes it, unfortunately. So much of my work, though, I tried to stay away from political work over the last few years because I thought poetry can be other things besides political, right? But I always come back to the idea that just to be a poet is kind of a radical act. So naturally, my poetry keeps circling around the politic. So this first poem, I'm just going to hold it up so you can see what it looks like, because there's a lot of blackout. It's a blackout poem, or also known as an erasure poem. And this is from an actual letter I received when I called out some racial microaggressions in an art group that I was receiving directly. Dear Georgina, I hope you will read this. I was deeply disturbed by your statements. You have missed the mark. I cannot presume to understand what your life path has been like, but I don't see the racism you're claiming exists. Is there racism? There might be, but we don't stand for such. I have a Native friend. Other than that, I have no opportunity to meet other Native people. I have many Black and Hispanic friends. What you are accusing is something you need to help with, rather than burning your bridges behind you. We need you. I wish you would reconsider your actions and find peace in your heart. And it's followed by a haiku that I wrote. The most effective catalyst to burn a bridge is pure gaslighting.